Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, October 30th, 2025. All right, we're going to start today with a topic that nobody else is talking about. The first story at the top of antiwar.com today: the U.S. bombs Somalia for 3 consecutive days. So the U.S. has launched 3 more airstrikes in Somalia over 3 consecutive days, according to press releases from U.S. Africa Command, as the Trump administration continues to bomb the country at a record pace. AFRICOM said that it launched an airstrike on October 26th that targeted al-Shabaab about 25 miles north of the southern port city of Kismayo. That same day, the U.S.-backed Somali government said that a precision airstrike killed an al-Shabaab leader. But the only thing is, they said that it happened much further north than where the U.S. claimed that this airstrike was launched. So not clear if it's the same airstrike or if the U.S. AFRICOM got the location wrong in the press release. So we don't really know. And of course, as always, AFRICOM offered no details about the strike, about casualty estimates or anything like that, or the potential for civilian harm. The command also announced 2 separate strikes in Somalia's northeastern Puntland region, launched on October 27th and October 28th. AFRICOM said that both strikes targeted the ISIS affiliate in the region and were launched about 53 miles southeast of the Gulf of Aden port city of Bosaso, and it shared no other details. This picture here is some of the U.S.-backed fighters in Puntland from earlier this month. So Puntland is not under the control of the U.S.-backed federal government, so the U.S. supports local forces in the region. And AFRICOM previously announced airstrikes in Puntland on October 24th and October 26th. So it was actually, on October 26th, there was the strike against al-Shabaab and also one against ISIS in Puntland. So they bombed Puntland 3 days in a row. And this comes as Puntland security forces said that they were intensifying operations against ISIS fighters hiding in the caves in the Kal-Misgad Mountains. This is a very remote mountainous region where this war is taking place. And they said they're intensifying operations with support from AFRICOM. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see more and more U.S. airstrikes there. And Puntland officials claim, and they have been claiming for a long time, that this ISIS affiliate is on the verge of defeat. But local sources told Garo Online that the militants are still entrenched in the area and have resorted to guerrilla tactics and are constantly moving between caves and valleys. So as we've been covering on this show, the U.S. has dramatically increased its airstrikes in Somalia this year. Based on my count, these 3 airstrikes bring the total number of U.S. airstrikes in Somalia this year to 89. Trump has shattered the previous annual record of 63, which he set back in 2019. And for context, Joe Biden launched 51 airstrikes in Somalia during his 4 years in power. And Obama launched 48 in his 8 years in power. So this is unprecedented, and literally nobody, no other U.S. media, people have had me on their shows to talk about it. So, other people have discussed this, but when it comes to media outlets online in the U.S., there's no coverage of this. And that's kind of the purpose of the way I'm trying to cover it, is to get people's attention, to get a conversation happening about this war. And the U.S. has been fighting al-Shabaab since the group first emerged in 2007, a year after the U.S. backed an Ethiopian invasion that ousted the Islamic Courts Union, which was a Muslim coalition that briefly held power in Mogadishu. And al-Shabaab was the radical offshoot of the Islamic Courts Union, and its first recorded attack was a suicide bombing that targeted Ethiopian troops occupying Mogadishu in 2007. And then the ISIS affiliate that the U.S. is fighting in Puntland started as an offshoot of al-Shabaab and first emerged in 2015. We see this pattern in U.S. wars in the region, in the Middle East and Africa. They start one war, and then in the same country, another group pops up, and they got to start bombing them too. All right, so the next one here, Amnesty says that U.S. strike on Yemen migrant facilities should be investigated as a war crime. So Amnesty International said on Wednesday that the U.S. bombing of a migrant detention facility in Yemen earlier this year amounted to an indiscriminate attack and should be investigated as a war crime. The U.S. strike was launched on April 28th and killed 68 African migrants who were detained at the facility in Yemen's northern Sada province. The attack was part of the U.S. military's bombing campaign in Yemen that was conducted from March 15th to May 6th, which was dubbed Operation Rough Rider and killed more than 250 civilians. Amnesty said in a report on the strike that it did not find any evidence that the migrant detention center was a military objective or that it contained any military objectives. And you see this picture here. This is at a hospital in Yemen, African migrants who were wounded in the attack. So the report, which involved interviews with 15 Ethiopian migrants who survived the attack, also pointed out that the U.S. should have been aware that the strike would result in heavy civilian casualties since the Saudi military, with support from the U.S., bombed the same facility in 2022 and killed more than 90 civilians. And so, the Saudis are using U.S. targeting data. So the U.S. had the targeting bank of the Saudis, and they still bombed this place and killed all these people. So what is the excuse for that? So the Amnesty report said, quote, given the airstrike killed and injured civilians, the U.S. authorities should investigate this attack as a war crime. The result of the investigation, including any conclusions related to civilian casualties and efforts to respond to them, should promptly be made public, end quote. Operation Rough Rider involved another mass civilian casualty event, the U.S. bombing of the Ras Issa fuel port in the Red Sea port city of Hodeidah, which occurred on April 17th. That strike killed 84 civilians, mainly workers at the port, according to Air Wars. And that was something I covered at the time, the day of, because Yemeni media was very clear. Like, it was clear to me that it was an attack on civilians. One reason why is because U.S. Central Command put out a statement on it and didn't even claim that they were targeting military infrastructure. The claim was that the Houthis, or Ansar Allah, who control and govern an area of Yemen where 70 to 80% of Yemenis live, the claim was that they were profiting off of fuel entering the port, like any other government does. And they use that to justify this massive attack that killed a lot of civilians, 84. I mean, that's a huge number. And this is something, again, just got very little attention at the time, and a lot of people are unaware of how bloody and brutal this U.S. bombing campaign in Yemen was, which was launched on behalf of Israel. They were trying to get the Houthis to stop attacking Israel, and they failed. They framed it as necessary to stop attacks on U.S. ships, but there were no attacks on U.S. ships happening at the time. And then they ended it with an agreement with the Houthis. Okay, we won't bomb Yemen if you don't target our ships, which that was on the table before they started the bombing campaign. It was all of this was very clear, yet they made it to be about something that it was not. All right, so the next one here, Gaza. The IDF says the truce is back on after killing 100 people. And then they also bombed Gaza again later the same day. So the Israeli military announced on Wednesday that it was re-implementing the ceasefire in Gaza after unleashing heavy airstrikes across the Strip that, according to Gaza's health ministry, killed at least 104 Palestinians, including 46 children and 20 women. And then, again, the IDF bombed Gaza, launched another airstrike later in the day after saying that they were, reenacting the ceasefire, which, using the word ceasefire, I mean, it's just, as I've said before, this wasn't a ceasefire deal. It was more of a de-escalation deal. But then this bombing, I think when I recorded the show yesterday, at the time I recorded it, the death toll was at 30. So through the night, they continued the bombing and just massacring women and children. And there's so many pictures and videos of children killed and wounded in these attacks. Just absolutely horrific. And so the escalation came after Israel claimed that its troops in Rafah came under attack, which killed one Israeli soldier. So another thing, yesterday it wasn't confirmed that an Israeli soldier was killed, but on Wednesday, that's what Israeli media reported. Israel accused Hamas of being behind the attack, but according to Israeli media, the IDF doesn't know if the attack was approved by Hamas leadership or if it was carried out independently by a cell of Palestinian fighters isolated in the Israeli-occupied area. Israel's Walla News reported that the attack started when the Israeli troops were using heavy equipment in the area, and a tunnel the militants were hiding in began to collapse. So According to the Israeli media reports, what happened is they're operating bulldozers and conducting demolitions, which they're still demolishing structures in Rafah, even after the ceasefire deal. But what the Israeli media is saying is that they're doing demolitions, and then the tunnel that these militants were in began to collapse, and they basically popped out and started attacking. And Hamas has denied involvement, and they've said before that they don't have any contact with any of their people in Rafah. They don't even know if they're there or alive. But despite that, the uncertainty, Israel unleashed hell on Gaza overnight, killing so many people. And you could see these tiny shrouds, these tiny bodies in these white shrouds being carried here. And Israel claimed that they targeted 30 terror commanders. That's who they claim that they targeted in these airstrikes. But most of the dead were women and children. Let's see. And then later in the day, on Wednesday, they launched another airstrike in Beit Lahia, which killed at least 2 people. And Israel has been violating the ceasefire deal by not allowing the sufficient number of aid trucks in, and all along. And now there's been more than 200 Palestinians killed since the so-called ceasefire went into effect on October 10th. And the U.S. has backed this, supported Israel's actions here. Trump said on Wednesday, quote, "They killed an Israeli soldier, so the Israelis hit back, and they should hit back," end quote. All right, so the next one here, Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene calls out Israel. So at least somebody in the government in Congress is calling this out. So Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, on Wednesday called out Israel for its heavy bombardment in Gaza and the killing of dozens of children in the Strip. Greene wrote on X, quote, "Israel's military said Wednesday that the ceasefire was back on in Gaza after it killed 104 people, including 46 children, according to local health officials. 46 children? Are these not war crimes?" End quote. And for months, Greene has been outspoken in her opposition to U.S. military aid to Israel, and she's introduced bills attempting to strip assistance to Israel from the annual Pentagon spending bill. And this is a shift for her. She used to be, as far as I was aware, pro-Israel, or she just didn't make a fuss about it, just kind of fell in line on the issue. But now she's been very outspoken. And then AIPAC went after her, and that has just made her even more outspoken. And, we're seeing, there's a few candidates, people trying to run for Congress or running for Congress on a Republican ticket, saying that they don't think the U.S. should give military aid to Israel. The fact that that's happening at all, I think, is significant. We're not going to see much change at the federal level probably for a long time. But the fact that you have people trying to run as people running as Republicans, saying things like that, not just immediately falling in line, meeting with the AIPAC representative and just saying, "Yep, they're our greatest ally," and all that stuff. So things are changing slowly, but they are changing. All right, so the next one here, Trump detaining British Muslim journalists for criticizing Israel. So this article is from Zeteo. So on Saturday evening, Sami Hamdi was addressing a crowded audience in Sacramento, beseeching U.S. politicians to take an America First approach rather than Israel First. Hours later, U.S. agents arrested Hamdi at an airport. Hamdi, a British Muslim journalist and commentator of Tunisian and Algerian descent, was visiting the U.S. for a speaking tour, something he had done in the past. On October 25th, Hamdi spoke at the annual gala of the Sacramento chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, a Muslim civil rights and advocacy group. After the event, he went to the San Francisco International Airport on his way to another car. I always forget how you say the abbreviation. It's CAIR. I forget if it's car or care. I don't know. Sam Husseini told me once, so he can correct me again if he's watching. But anyway, so on his way to a care event in Florida, upon arriving at the airport and heading through security, though immigration officials detained him and informed him his visitor visa has been revoked. The legal rationale for the arrest was unclear, but 2 unelected far-right Islamophobic figures quickly took credit: Laura Loomer and Amy Meckelberg. Loomer, I don't know who this Meckelberg person is, but Loomer is just completely out of her mind. But they're taking credit. They're claiming that he was training U.S. Muslims in digital agitation and electoral sabotage aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood doctrine. This is the Department of Homeland Security celebrated Hamdi's visa revocation and detention in a social media post attached to the X post in a video clip of Hamdi speaking about Israel and Palestine. DHS claims the recording shows him cheering on the terrorist attack, referring to the Hamas-led attack on Israel on October 7, 2023. A friend of Hamdi's family says the clip is missing context. In a different video around the same time, Hamdi made clear that no one should celebrate death, and his detention is part of a broader crackdown in the U.S. against speech supporting Palestine and opposing Israel, or being critical of Israel. And so what was interesting, so I forgot about this, but I remember this clip went viral. And this guy, Hamdi, last year, he was arguing that the Democrats were not the lesser of two evils relative to Trump, and urged Muslim Americans in swing states to punish Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for complicity in genocide. He said, quote, "You survived 4 years of Trump. You could survive again. 240,000 Palestinians did not survive 4 years of Biden," end quote. So I forgot about that. But, I think that's interesting. This guy who's locked up. So I read this story. We had it on the lower part of the page yesterday. I thought he was just deported. I didn't realize he's still in detention. I mean, either way, it's clear taking action against someone for speech critical of Israel, but he remains locked up for being critical of Israel. All right, so the next one here, Trump says begin testing nukes immediately. So this is kind of crazy. Trump just fired off this Truth social post not long before I started recording this, saying that he has instructed the Defense Department. This article is from NBC. All the mainstream outlets are still calling the War Department the Defense Department. I really love the War Department for editorial purposes. But anyway, so they're saying, so Trump instructed the War Department to immediately resume testing nuclear weapons. He said, quote, "Because of other countries' testing programs, I have instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis," end quote. And he says that the process will begin immediately. So I don't know what he's talking about, other countries testing nuclear weapons. We've had Russia recently tested a nuclear-capable missile and also some sort of nuclear-capable underwater drone weapon. And North Korea has fired off a couple missiles. But they haven't exploded any nukes, I mean, as far as I'm aware. So I think Trump believes that these amount to, blowing nuclear weapons tests, which they do not. So I'm hoping somebody explains it to him, the situation here. But I don't know. I feel like the Pentagon's probably just going to go with this. Hegseth's just going to say, yes, sir, we'll start blowing up nukes, which is just really crazy. And this is also right before he's going to meet with Xi Jinping. That meeting could be happening right now, at any moment right now in South Korea. There's hope for some sort of breakthrough trade deal, potentially easing of tensions over Taiwan. But then he says this, I don't know. It's not really a good sign. And he also announced that South Korea can build, he said that he's going to allow them to build nuclear-powered submarines. So the next one here, Trump says that Japan to get first missiles for F-35s. So this article is from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. So during his Asia trip, Trump announced that he had approved missiles for Japan's fleet of F-35s, and the first delivery of the munitions would occur this week. Speaking aboard the USS George Washington in Japan, Trump said, quote, "I'm delighted to report that I've just approved the first batch of missiles that will arrive this week, so they're ahead of schedule," end quote. The sale is for AIM-120 AMRAAM and AIM-9X Sidewinder missiles. President Joe Biden approved a $3.6 billion sale for these missiles back in January, so earlier this year, and Trump saying that they're on the way. And just kind of, he reaffirmed, the U.S. military alliance with Japan while he was there and everything. And even though I haven't been covering Asia enough, I need to kind of start paying more attention to the developments over there. I'm not worried so much as I used to be about a potential war with China, because I think a lot of even hawks in the U.S. have realized that the U.S. just doesn't have the capability to to really do that or prepare for a war with China. But at the same time, tensions are still high. There's still things going on in the South China Sea. A U.S. helicopter and fighter jet just crashed in the South China Sea recently. They're still very active there. And this kind of overall military buildup in the region is still going on. So I need to focus on it more. And I'm sure we'll have a story about the Xi Jinping meeting tomorrow. All right, the next one here, the IDF raids Syrian village and sets up new checkpoints. So this article is from Jason Ditz. So direct negotiations between Israel and Syria continue with reports that the talks are nearing completion, with Israel having assured Syria that it does not specifically support secessionist movements among the Syrian Druze population. But it appears that during these talks, which kind of the whole focus, the idea is about this Israeli occupation of southwestern Syria and invasion since the ousting of Bashar al-Assad, Israel continues to push forward and move further in. And so they pushed into some more villages in southwest Syria over the past day, and they have also set up some checkpoints. So, the people in these villages are really living under an Israeli military occupation. All right, so the next one here, the SDF designates fighters for integration deal with Damascus. This article's from the Cradle. So the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, has handed over a list to Washington's coalition in Syria, containing the names of commanders that will be integrated into Damascus's forces as part of a deal signed in March this year. Kurdish media reported on October 29th. So the list includes the names of the commanders of 3 military divisions that will be integrated into the Syrian army, 1 division in the Syrian Jazeera region, another in the Euphrates region, and the third in Deir ez-Zor. According to the report, 30% of the general staff positions are expected to go to SDF commanders. It adds that the list includes the names of commanders who will lead 3 special brigades affiliated with the Syrian general staff. So they're giving the Kurds some leadership positions in the military if this integration deal goes through. And it looks like we're moving towards that for a little while there. It seemed like war was going to erupt in north and eastern Syria, but it seems like they're going through with this integration thing now. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. bombs 15th alleged drug boat. So the U.S. military has bombed another alleged drug boat in the waters of Latin America, according to a statement from U.S. War Secretary Pete Hegseth. Hegseth said the vessel was targeted in the Eastern Pacific and provided no evidence to back up the claims that it was carrying drugs. He claimed the strike killed 4 narco-terrorists, which is the term they're using to justify killing these people and conducting what are extrajudicial executions at sea. And the attack brings the total number of boats the U.S. has bombed since September 2nd to 15, and the total number of people killed in the campaign to 61. So we're getting some pretty high numbers here. And again, this is the Eastern Pacific. They've bombed 8 boats in the Caribbean and 6 in the Eastern Pacific. A day earlier, Hegseth announced the bombing of 4 boats in a single day and said that 1 survivor was rescued by the Mexican government. They're really showing that they're escalating this. He's saying they're going to keep at it, comparing it to the war on terror, which has been going on for 25 years now. Basically promising that this is just going to be never ending now, this type of military operation. And of course, the push toward and the tensions over Venezuela and the push toward regime change continue. The next one here, Billboard urges troops not to break the law in boat strikes. I thought this was interesting. This article is from Task and Purpose. So don't let them make you break the law. Read new digital billboards on expressways near U.S. Southern Command headquarters in Doral, Florida, where the U.S. military's ongoing operations in the Caribbean Sea are being overseen. The billboards were put up in response to the ongoing military strikes ordered by President Donald Trump's administration and what the White House and Pentagon have described as a concerted campaign against narco-terrorists. The veterans behind the billboards at Win Without War and About Face Veterans Against a War describe it differently, calling them ongoing lawless strikes on boats near the South American coasts. The billboards are part of a very public pressure campaign run by veterans at the 2 organizations in response to the Trump administration's unprecedented use of the military, the increasing use of the National Guard for domestic policing, and an active duty force buildup in the Caribbean of nearly 10,000 troops. warships, guided missile destroyers, surveillance aircraft, and drones. Over the last few months, the Pentagon has carried out at least 11 deadly strikes. Well, we're up to 15 now against fishing boats. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting that they're putting up these billboards. And also, I did not know that Harrison Mann, who was a U.S. Army, I forget what rank he was, but he was an officer who worked in the Pentagon's intelligence agency, who resigned in protest of U.S. support for Israel during the Biden administration. Now he is the Associate Director for Policy and Campaigns for Win Without War. So he's involved in this. And, the head of U.S. Southern Command is stepping down, a 4-star admiral, career military officer. And the command posts, it's very unusual for a career officer to resign 1 year into his post as a commander of a major military command like that. And according to the New York Times, he raised issues about the bombing of the boats. And then we had that story yesterday that the military officials involved in this campaign are having to sign NDAs. So there's just a lot, sketchy stuff. Not sketchy stuff. I mean, it's clearly, I think, criminal and illegal what the Trump administration is doing. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. to remove some troops from Eastern Europe. So the U.S. will be removing some troops from Eastern Europe, U.S. and Romanian officials said on Wednesday, a move that's angered Russia hawks, even though the Pentagon is still leaving a substantial number of forces in the region. U.S. Army Europe and Africa said in a statement that the 2nd Infantry Brigade combat team of the 101st Airborne Division will be redeployed to their home base in Kentucky and will not be replaced. According to Foreign Policy, the brigade has about 3,000 troops in Europe and is stationed across Romania, Slovakia, Hungary, and Bulgaria. So U.S. Army Europe and Africa said in a statement, quote, "This is not an American withdrawal from Europe or a signal of lessened commitment to NATO in Article 5. Rather, this is a positive sign of increased European capability and responsibility. Our NATO allies are meeting President Trump's call to take primary responsibility for the conventional defense of Europe. This force posture adjustment will not change the security environment in Europe," end quote. So there will still be a significant number of troops deployed in Eastern Europe after the drawdown, as Romanian officials said that 1,000 U.S. troops would remain in Romania. And there was other reports that said some of these troops were in Poland, but according to numbers from the State Department at the beginning of the year, there's 10,000 U.S. troops in Poland, which is a pretty significant number. So even if they take 1,000 out, that's still a pretty big buildup. It's still more than were in Eastern Europe before Russia invaded Ukraine. Yet we're seeing criticism from Republicans going after Trump for this. The heads of the Senate and House Armed Services Committee strongly condemned the drawdown. In a statement, this is Senator Roger Wicker and Representative Mike Rogers. They said in a joint statement, quote, "We strongly oppose the decision not to maintain the rotational U.S. brigade in Romania and the Pentagon's process for its ongoing force posture review that may result in further drawdowns of U.S. forces from Eastern Europe," end quote. All right, the next one, the Pentagon orders the National Guard to create a quick reaction force. So this article is from The Guardian. A top U.S. military official has ordered the National Guards of all 50 U.S. states, the District of Columbia, and U.S. territories to form quick reaction forces trained in riot control, including use of batons, body shields, tasers, and pepper spray, according to an internal Pentagon directive reviewed by The Guardian. The memo, signed on October 8th by Major General Ronald Burkett, the Director of Operations for the Pentagon's National Guard Bureau, sets thresholds for the size of the quick reaction force to be trained in each state, with most states required to train 500 National Guard members for a total of 23,500 troops nationwide. So that's a pretty significant force. As authority, Burkett cited Donald Trump's August executive order that deployed the Guard to fight crime in Washington, D.C. That same order required the Secretary of Defense to create a standing National Guard quick reaction force available for rapid nationwide deployment in quelling civil disturbances. Janessa Goldbeck, a former U.S. Marine Corps captain and chief executive of the Vet Voice Foundation, said the orders represented an attempt by the president to normalize a national militarized police force. And I do think, that was my initial reaction to the deployments. What was the first deployment? Was it in LA or was DC the first one? I forget, but because it didn't seem like there was that much going on. And I mean, we've seen some videos of National Guardsmen like picking up trash off the street in D.C. But it seemed to me like they're trying to set a precedent here, and I think that's pretty clear now. But that is it for the news for today. So please go check out our viewpoints. One from Ted Snyder: Tomahawks for Ukraine? No, but that's not the story. One from Daniel McAdams: Norwegian Peace Council rejects Peace Prize winner. One from Eldar Mamdov: annulled, Russia won't abide by snapback sanctions on Iran. One from Abdallah Al-Jazar: my last words to Gaza. And our spotlight from Lyle Goldstein: the U.S. must beware of Taiwan's reckless leader. So please go check all of that out. I saw Taiwan just hosted their first APAC visit, which I thought was interesting. So anyway, that is it for me for today. What do we have? One more show this week. I'm hoping that Trump, I don't know, isn't serious about testing nukes again. That would just be crazy. But anyway, I will be back tomorrow. Please like, subscribe, follow us on social media, comment. All that stuff helps us out. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, you could leave a review. I think on other podcasts like Spotify, you could do that too. Anyway, I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.